Hey everyone, welcome to the Grit Crusade, the show where we really talk about what's authentic and real in life. You know, the grit, getting real in the trenches of life. I'm your host, Brooke Black, and I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a self-proclaimed comeback queen, as in I've been to the bottom and back and experienced a lot in life. We're here just to get real and be authentic because that's where we truly live and experience life. So, from listening to me share the wisdom about all the things I've totally messed up on in life and having some guests join us along the way, I'm so excited that you're here. And more than anything, share this with people that you know could use it too. So, now let's dig in and get real in the trenches. Hey everyone, glad you're here. So excited for today's episode of the Grit Crusade. If you're new, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. You guys are officially part of the Grit Gang. That sounds good, doesn't it? Grit Gang, Grit Guys, Grit Girls, Grit Peeps. Yeah, I like it. All inclusive there. I am Brooke. I am your host. I cannot tell you what it means to me to have you here with me today. This podcast has been such an amazing vessel and opportunity for me to connect with so many people. So here we go. Today's episode is about caging our assumptions. So some of the things we talk about on here are hard to hear. Some of them are fun. Some of them are funny. Sometimes I'm funny. Sometimes I just try to be funny. But sometimes there are things that we need to hear. And that's what today's episode's about. So we all have assumptions in life. We've probably heard like the age old, ism of don't assume or you'll make an ass out of you and me, right? And so we've heard those things and, we know making assumptions is bad. We should make sure we know the truth. And something kind of interesting and funny happened with my husband and I recently. And so it really got me digging into this topic of assumptions and like, where does it come from? What is it about? Why does our brain make these connections, right? And so I did a little research and digging. I am a lifelong eternal learner and reader. And when I started looking into the brain research, the brain-based research tells us that our brain is constantly looking for patterns. So it is our brain's way of conserving energy, of making things easier for ourselves. So based on the things that we've learned and seen around us, our brain is automatically and so quickly going and firing everything together. Like, for example, if you see a bridge, you assume on the other side of a bridge is a road to come off of the bridge, right? Or another piece of land. Things that we've learned so quickly over time. And some of those things may seem menial. What happens when those assumptions begin to get in the way of our life, our work, and our relationships? Because when we start to make all of these assumptions, it gets back into the lies that we're telling ourselves or that we're beginning to believe. And sometimes we don't even know that they're there. And so that is what we're going to dig in today on the Grit Crusade. So first up, does the Monopoly man have a monocle? Like the little eyeglass, like the like clue type thing. I would swear in my brain growing up that the Monopoly man has a monocle. My husband swears the Monopoly man doesn't have a monocle. And we are both amongst groups of people who, like thousands and thousands, and maybe even hundreds of millions of people that believe both of those things. And when that happens, we are both operating off assumptions of what we remember. And it's called the Mandela effect. So when Nelson Mandela passed away, there were so many people that believed that they had already seen news reports where he had died in jail like years before, but he didn't. He didn't die then. And so it turned into something called the Mandela effect. And so because the Monopoly man wears a top hat, and maybe because like the Planter's Peanut does have a monocle, our brain starts to put that together and we start to make these assumptions of what we know, when in fact, the Monopoly man, even though I don't want to tell him, my husband is right, the Monopoly man does not have a monocle. So why would our brains tell us that it has a monocle? That's how assumptions start. And so this whole topic kind of started coming to light in my brain when my husband and I were talking about our nightstands, right? Like two totally like just bland things. So a couple years ago, I bought us these really cute nightstands from Target. They're not super expensive or anything, but they're really nice, like a nice matte black. Well, a matte black is going to scratch really easily, right? So I have bought these little cute little wooden trays, to sit on top of them so that when you have a drink, you put it on there or something wet and you don't sit it on the nightstand. Okay. And so I feel like everyone knows that, right? Wrong. That was my assumption. So months go by, a year goes by, and his nightstand is starting to look worse and worse. And like the particle board stuff's starting to bubble up on it. And it's now literally looking like I need a giant tray to cover the top of it. And I'm thinking to myself, why is he not sitting stuff on the tray? Why does he keep sitting stuff on the nightstand? Everyone knows that you don't sit stuff on wood or it's going to mess it up. And so I asked him the other day, I'm like, hey, you know how I got you a tray to put on there? I just assumed you knew that you should put drinks and stuff on the tray. And he was like, I never had nightstands growing up. Hello. Like what? So this whole time, like 2 years worth, I'm just assuming he's being like negligent and doesn't care and doesn't want to put his, thing over there. And lo and behold, not only does he not recollect if he did having a nightstand growing up, he never really thought about that you shouldn't just sit stuff on furniture everywhere. When I grew up in a house where whether we got something from a yard sale or a fancy furniture store, my mom was taking care of every little tiny thing. So this man that I love and I know and I care for, my partner and I live with, I assumed he knew something that he didn't. And this whole time I was wrong. And so it just kind of dawns on me. If I am holding that deep rooted assumption about someone I know so well, multiply that times 600 people in your company or 5 people in your office, and what are you assuming about them that might be wrong too? I mean, the nightstand is like ultimately kind of inconsequential, but you're over here worried this whole time about why somebody, maybe your new partner that you live with or a roommate, they're not putting their laundry in the laundry basket. What if they didn't grow up in a house where people put laundry in a laundry basket? Or you want to know why your friend's not very motivated at work? What if they didn't grow up in a house where someone was motivated? What if they didn't grow up in a house where someone had a job, much less ever saw someone get a promotion and know what that looks like and how it's celebrated and how we show up for each other and cheer each other on? Like what? Like my whole brain was sitting there exploding as I was sitting there thinking of like all of these things that I have assumed over time. And not just about my husband, but about all the people that I work around. And so that is what we're going to dig in today. Not abolishing our assumptions, not completely getting rid of them, because I feel like saying, don't assume anything ever would be going counterproductive to nature. Like our brains naturally do that. So I feel like you have to work with nature, but caging our assumptions, examining them, challenging them before we let them back out into the world, into our thought processes. So that's what we're going to tackle today. But first, trivia in the trenches. I love this part of the episode. Yay. Okay. So our trivia in the trenches today is kind of an assumption because when I was doing a little digging for our trivia, I assumed the wrong answer. So if it's your first time, we like to do trivia here on the Grit Crusade. And when I have a guest, I ask them trivia and hopefully we stump them. So far, we've got a 100% stump rate. And when it's just me and you, then I'm just asking you. So here's our trivia in the trenches for today. Who was the first human in outer space? What did your brain just tell you? Did you jump to Neil Armstrong? That's what I jumped to, was Neil Armstrong. But we're wrong. Neil Armstrong was the first man on the moon. But the first human in outer space was Yuri Gagarin. Hope I'm saying that right. He was a Soviet pilot and cosmonaut, and he became the first human to journey into outer space, traveling on the Vostok 1 capsule. Gagarin completed one orbit around the Earth on April 12th, 1961. Yeah, so those assumptions will make our brains fire really quickly, one way or the other. My brain immediately went, Neil Armstrong. And I was like, that's the moon, right? But just like the nightstand, sometimes those assumptions can get us into trouble. So as I was doing research, before we jump into what to do about caging these assumptions, I was doing some research and there's this website called hellobrain.com. It's from our Aussie friends down in Australia. And in the article, it's talking about an activity they did at work called I Notice, I Imagine. So in the activity, people were standing face to face and kind of like a team building atmosphere. And they're standing in front of someone and they tell them, this is what I notice about you. Like maybe I notice that you are a Caucasian human, you have on Nike tennis shoes, and you have a red backpack on. So I assume, or I imagine, and then they would say what they were imagined. And at the end of the exercise, the other person would tell them how much of that they got correct. And incidentally, a lot of it was not correct at all. And so the things that they took, the big takeaway from that, and I'm going to quote the article so I don't get this part wrong, was that the only things we can notice are what people are directly saying, doing, or wearing. Everything else is imagined or assumed. But it is my business to be in control of my own assumptions about other people, because the assumptions lead us to thinking that we are true and correct in our knowledge of other people, and 9 times out of 10, we are incorrect. Isn't that crazy? So what do we do that? We know we have assumptions. We know they can get us into dangerous trouble, or maybe nightstand trouble in my example here. So what do we do then? Well, the first step is just to recognize them. Acknowledge that you have these assumptions and that you're human, and that's okay. Our brains are naturally creating patterns to keep us safe, to help make sense of the world around us, to create some sort of frame of reference. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you a bad human. It is what it is. But recognizing or acknowledging that we hold these beliefs that sometimes kind of crept in on their own is the first step to caging those assumptions and really taking time to examine them. So acknowledge that you have these, know that you have these assumptions, and then you can start taking steps towards working toward what they are. What are these assumptions that I'm holding? For me, it's that other people were raised like me. And that is both good and that is both bad. Because those of you who've heard me talk about my mom and my journey with my mom through opioid addiction and suicide, is I grew up with a mom who picked me up from school every single day. I was a car rider. She was there in line on time. When I got to junior high, I wanted to get there later because I didn't have enough time to talk to my friends. She was amazing. Some people were bus riders and they didn't see their parents till after dark. It's not good or bad. It is what it is. On the flip side, some people had parents that were engaged and consistent throughout their whole life and still have parents as adulthood. I don't have a mother in my adult life, an amazing stepmom and dad who love me, but everyone's journey is different. And so part of acknowledging those assumptions is realizing no two people's journey has been the same. Not necessarily good or bad. It's just different. And as you're acknowledging those assumptions, being mindful of what's going on in your brain. So I was in Costa Rica several months ago and doing yoga at this amazing retreat. I went to the Imiloa Institute, and our yoga teacher told us this statement, and it stuck with me. You are not your mind. That's why you can observe your thoughts. Let me say it again. You are not your mind. That's why we can observe our thoughts. So you hear people say like mind, body, soul, spirit. Your mind is not the same thing as your brain. Sometimes you're driving and 10 minutes later, you realize you've not been paying attention to anything, but your eyes are still on the road and your hands are still on the steering wheel. Okay. Your mind is very powerful. It's its own beast. And learning to be mindful in the moments of our day, maybe even just in a few moments, is how we start to acknowledge those assumptions, and that keeps us rooted and grounded in what's true. Okay, the second way. So the first way is to acknowledge our assumptions. And then the second way is to dig into our beliefs. Why do you believe that? Is it because someone told you to believe that? Ooh, I'll give you an example of growing up. So when I was young, I went to a missionary Baptist church. Ever been to a missionary Baptist church? It's pretty, strict. And in our church, dancing was not allowed. It was not permitted. But I wanted to go to fifth quarter, which was a dance at the Methodist church after the football games on Friday nights. And my parents were not on board at first because I was going to be dancing, and dancing was not allowed at our church. Fast forward now to a 38-year-old adult, and dancing is great. Do I enjoy dancing? Not really, not a lot of it, but it's not something that I believe anymore. So sometimes we have these deep-rooted beliefs that we need to dig into and go, why do I even believe this? Is this something I still believe? Or is this something I believed because someone else believed it? And those times in life when we find ourselves in transitions and coming out of toxic relationships and trying to heal old wounds are huge times for digging into those beliefs and realizing sometimes we picked them up almost like baggage or a tick or something that's just leeching itself off of us. And we need to unearth that and go, oh, that's not me. I don't want to be like that anymore, because we are the ones that have the power to change what we believe. So caging our assumptions starts with acknowledging that we have those and then digging into those beliefs and why do we believe those things. And then next is ask questions. So I've acknowledged I have these assumptions. I'm digging into why I believed it in the first place. Why did I think he knew he would sit that cup where it was supposed to go on the nightstand? And then asking the questions. And sometimes they're hard questions, and that's okay. Because to live in a state of vulnerability and authenticity where we really are who we are is sometimes uncomfortable and hard, because we live in a world of fake. We live in a world of filters and Instagram glory, and it's okay to ask hard questions. Now, there's a way to communicate it and a way not to. So saying like, let me get this straight, or are you telling me, is totally different than, hey, will you walk through this with me? Will you let me talk this through and see kind of where am I getting off course here? Don't be afraid to ask other people to come sit in that mess with you and talk you through it and help you kind of navigate the hard. It is our responsibility in life to question everything. Please ask questions. Don't accept things that I say or anyone else says without asking the right questions to yourself and to others. If you assume that someone of a certain race, maybe you assume that all Hispanics like Mexican food, or assume that all Hispanics speak Spanish, wrong. Or you assume that everyone that's old is tired and doesn't want to talk, wrong. Okay, those assumptions can get unearthed by asking questions to each other. When we start to ask those questions, we start to learn not only our own truth, but learn each other's truth, because that's what it's really about. That is where authentic connection lives. I found this quote that really applies to asking these questions, because I feel like there's kind of this vicious cycle of creating these assumptions of, it can be even as simple as, okay, I called somebody and then they didn't respond. And so now they're mad at me and now they're not answering me. And then, oh my gosh, what if, and we start that lies we tell ourselves, you know? And so the quote said, worrying is stupid. It's like walking around with an umbrella waiting for it to rain, right? There's no point in us sitting here worrying about all of these things. And so assumptions can creep in, and it truly can affect our mental health and our well-being, which connects back to acknowledging and being mindful and digging in and asking those questions. All right, so that's 3 ways to cage our beliefs. 2 more. Listen with your full attention. And this is something I just need a shirt. Like, I am so guilty of this. Being on my phone and texting and somebody's talking to me and I'm looking up and looking down and looking up and looking down and going back and forth and going back. Be right here, right here. There's so much we can pick up from other people when we are looking them in the eye, when we are paying attention to what's going on and actually seeing their body language and seeing what's happening in the room in front of us. Okay, so the only things that are true and real that we know is what we can see, what we can hear, and the actions that are in front of us. So if we're not giving something our full attention, then we've put like a 25% lens on actually interpreting the things that are going around us. And then we assume we know what's going on. It's like walking in the middle of a conversation. We don't get the full story that way. And that can be dangerous. Dangerous to us, dangerous to others, and not allowing us to shine our light in the world around us. So, gotta acknowledge that we have these assumptions. Dig into our beliefs about them. Don't be afraid to ask. Have that courage to ask those questions. Listen with intent, like our full focused attention, and then get out there. Diversify your experiences. I feel like this one is probably just almost key to all the other pieces coming together. So how does one diversify your experiences? Well, I can tell you what. If you believe what you believe and you're only around people that believe what you believe, who believe what they were told to believe by the people who told you to believe what you believe, y'all all gonna be the same. And you know what that is? Boring. Okay. So get out there, travel. I can't travel. I don't have enough money. Go to a different church that's not your denomination. You're not going to hell for that. Let me tell you that right now. Okay, you heard it here first. Go to a ball game not in your neighborhood. Some of the best stories I have in life are strangers I have met along the way. So I'll give you a embarrassing 13-year-old example. Okay, it's 13 years old. I had gone on a youth group trip to Breckenridge, Colorado to go snow skiing. And I was on this is so embarrassing. I was on a bus, like shuttle bus parking lot to slopes, right? I'd never skied before. I had been to Florida. I had never been anywhere. I'd grown up in a Hispanic, white, and Black community. So I wasn't just all, around all white people or all people of a certain socioeconomic status or anything like that. I'll never forget this man as long as I live. He had his hand up and he was holding on to the rail, and I said something to him and he said something back to me, and I didn't understand what he said. And he said something again, and I said, "You don't speak English?" And he goes, "No." And I was like, "You don't speak English." He was a Black man. I had never met a Black man before in my life that didn't speak English, because Arkansas, small state, small town, not traveled a lot. Huh? Where are Black people that don't speak English in my 13-year-old brain, right? When I tell you that showed me at the raw age of 13 how small my worldview was. Fast forward 15 years later, I'm in Africa learning Swahili, and how much I have learned and grown since then. But we don't know what we don't know. It didn't make me a bad person. It didn't make me racist because I hadn't ever met someone that was of a certain race that didn't speak another. It was a bad assumption of mine. I remember being so embarrassed in that moment when I realized, what am I even thinking? Didn't say anything back to him. I just remember having that monologue inside going, huh? What? What's going on here? And going, oh my gosh, you think this because you've never met anyone who XYZ. So that's why diversifying our experiences is so, so important. So caging our assumptions. We aren't trying to get rid of them. We're not trying to act like that our brain even has the capacity to do that. But if we can acknowledge they're there and be mindful, if we can learn to dig in and ask the right questions, and then, really just diversify our experiences and making sure that we're listening to the people around us, we can really change the way we see the world. And over time, that will change the way we experience the world and how others see the world, because we don't have to keep going through this life pretending like everyone has it all together and pretending like that we need to be the ones trying to get somewhere. There is no somewhere. There is no destination on this side of the earth. Your life, your journey is about you and you becoming a better version of you. And you can do it one day, one assumption, and one thought process at a time. Thank you for spending time with me today here on the Grit Crusade. It's been so fun. And I cannot wait to see and hear in the comments from you guys what you think about caging your assumptions or what silly nightstand stories you have to share. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Grit Crusade podcast with Brooke Platt. Our theme song is Thunder City by Luna Ray. This podcast was produced by Luminate Media Group. Our executive producer is Josh Freeman, and our audio engineer is Steven Stringer. Thank you for listening, and join us again next time.